And welcome back, everybody, to the California Small Farm Conference. My name is Evan Wigg. I'm with Community Alliance of Family Farmers, and we are really excited to have you here for this afternoon's workshop, Legal Resilience for Your Farm. I think this is a really important topic. Obviously, it's not the first thing that people think about when they start a farm. I don't think anybody gets into agriculture with the hopes of, spending their time with legalese, but it's obviously very important, and we're really lucky to have a wonderful speaker, James, here to go over this topic with you. I want to encourage everybody to use the functions down below in the chat to introduce yourselves, make comments, share resources, and ask questions of today's presenter. And know that this this workshop is being recorded. We'll share the link with folks after the conference. Without further ado, then, I hope you enjoyed this workshop, and we hope to see you soon. Thanks for being here, James.
Let me get on mute there. Happy to be here, Evan. And one quick question before we get started, just around those polls that we talked about. Are you gonna throw those up, or
You just let me know when you want it to go up.
Okay, great. Okay, well, hi everyone. It's funny, I can't see anybody, which is I think how this is designed through Zoom. But it looks like there's 30 of us in here, so excited to spend some time and talk to you all about legal resilience. And when we talk and think about legal resilience, I think I'm gonna get into some polling here in a second just to start. Well, let me bring my slides up here. Let's get going. Okay, cool. I think we're looking good.
Looking great.
Great. So a few questions to get us started. So Evan, feel free to throw these both in the poll. The first one being, on a scale of 1 to 3, how concerned are you about legal issues or ramifications on your farm, as you understand those things to be? And the second question is, have you ever had any legal issues come up that required you to consult with a lawyer to remedy it? Obviously, feel free to not share if you don't want to. This isn't being used for anything. It's just kind of
Anonymous answers, folks.
Yeah, anonymous answers, and it's more to help me orient kind of some of the presentation. But anyway, so feel free to answer. And let's see, is there a way for me to see those?
Yep, I'll share the results once we get a nice
Okay,
we got
cool.
50% of participants have responded so far. So folks are filling it out right now.
Great. Okay, let me stop sharing real quick. Okay. Q&A answered. We'll see a couple things in chat. Okay, well,
All right. I think we can probably close this poll. We got 75% participation here. So let's see
great.
what we got here.
There we go. Okay, so somewhat and no. Great. This is fantastic. I think you all who answered no, the 88% of folks answering no, you are in good company. Almost, let me pull my slides back up here. It's very rare. But when it happens, you want to be prepared. And I think that's a big part of what we're all here to talk about today. And I also really encourage folks to throw random questions, anything that they've learned that's useful in the chat. A lot of the material that we'll be talking about today comes from the Farm Commons Legal Ecosystems Fellowship Program, which is a train the trainers program designed to kind of help folks who work with farmers and farmers themselves feel a little bit more comfortable talking about legal issues. Spend a very little bit of time on this slide, but this is about who I am. So my name is James Nakahara, and for the last 3 years, I've been a business advisor with Kitchen Table Advisors. We work with small family farms and ranches throughout the Bay Area. We do this through one-on-one business advising and through some larger food systems change projects that kind of revolve around equitable access to land, markets, and capital. And the organization's been around for 10 years. We just hit our 10-year anniversary last year, and I think we've learned a lot. One of the things that we've learned in our one-on-one business advising work is like there are certain times where you have to just say, you need to talk to a lawyer. Like we can help with a lot of things, but at a certain point, there's certain things that come up where you're like, oh, I should consult a lawyer for this. And my hope is that through talking through some of these elements of kind of farm law type things, folks will be able to figure out where those lines are for their own businesses or for folks that they're working with. Um, okay, so let's get into it. Liability. What is it? You know, why does it matter? What we're talking about when we're talking about like farm liability, it's a legal liability, it's a responsibility or obligation under law for something that you've done or harm you may have caused. It can look really different. I think there's way too many words on this slide, but I think it's important for folks to have a snapshot. And these are kind of the types of liability that are most germane to farm businesses. Going down the list, product liabilities, you know, an example of when maybe you have packed lettuce that got somebody sick. So you're legally responsible for ensuring they're safe for consumption. And that doesn't mean that it has to be perfectly clean all the time in every way. It means that you've created the safest system possible for your business. Um, you know, and that can look a lot of different ways. Some of the mega farms have like on their clamshells, they say like, please, you know, even though we've washed this, please wash this again. That's a legal disclaimer that they put on there too to help, you know, kind of insulate a little bit. Um, Premises liability, this gets us into the place talking about kind of on-farm safety, visitors, employees, people getting injured due to unsafe conditions. You could be held responsible. That's again also very dependent on circumstances. Everything that we will talk about today is going to be heavily caveated by the unique set of circumstances for each case. And in some circumstances, we'll actually talk through a couple of hypotheticals. Employment liability. So this is the arena that's going to deal with anything involving workers' comp, OSHA, those types of things, adherence to labor laws, safe work environment. I have worked with farmers who have had employees who've gotten injured, and we can talk through some of what that process then turns into. But there's a lot of back and forths between insurance providers, lawyers, sometimes business owners, the employee. It gets really complicated, which is why this is more of an overview. Environment has to deal with mainly the thing that we'll touch related to farming is like what's being leached into groundwater, what are the kind of environmental impacts. Occasionally that can be things like removing historically recognized or culturally significant trees or things like that. Like kind of land lot adjustment type things will fall under that too. And there's lots of other examples. But these are probably the most common for farm world type things. Let me look at the Q&A real quick. And starting. Okay, we'll talk about business structure a little bit, but I might follow up with that person later. Also, just a quick bit of housekeeping. If there's something, and Evan, folks can't talk, right? It's just chat.
That's correct. You guys can use the chat feature or the Q&A feature to interact.
Okay, great. Please do. I can see them when somebody pops something in there. So if you want to stop me and ask a question as I'm going, please feel free. And then there'll be time at the end for me to kind of review questions and go over them too. But as I'm going, if something pops into your head that's something you're curious about or interested in, please bring it up. Okay, so managing liability. Generally speaking, following best practices in production and safety. And if you're not sure what those best practices are, there are a myriad of organizations that you can reach out to, small business development centers, CAF, CalCan, UCANR, RCDs, farm bureaus. Like there's lots of resources in your area depending upon where you are, and there will be technical assistance of some form that should be able to help you with some of this. And we'll get into what best practices look like a little bit more. I'm going to be annoying with how many times I say this, but insurance is really important. And having insurance is probably going to be one of the best ways that you can insulate yourself, even more so than business structure. A lot of people get into this thing of thinking, well, if I'm a sole proprietor, we're all held liable, but if we have a corporation, then our personal assets aren't. And that's all true. All, or at least parts of that are true. But the overarching thing is insurance is going to be your overall best way to insulate you from most types of liability. Additionally, keeping informed about and complying with relevant laws and regulations is going to be really helpful too. And sorry, I got distracted here. And then consulting with a legal professional to understand specific liabilities related to your farm business. If you have the means and the time, which, we probably have some more rain coming and there's going to be a couple of rainy days, I'd really recommend people reaching out to find somebody familiar with agricultural law, farm law, like an element of farming law, and or just a lawyer that you trust and feel comfortable talking about, just to have somebody in your network for when you need them. You won't need them. You hopefully won't need them. Lawyers are really expensive, but this is, if all of my whole talk could be condensed into one sentence, it would definitely be the like an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure, because so many of these problems get calcified and then they explode and they become really, really hard to solve later. And yeah, so word general advice, do the hard things ahead of time, and that will be helpful. I'm gonna take a quick break to look at the chat here. Okay, so in Q&A, do you have a suggestion on an insurance company who works with small farms? It really depends on the county you're in. Different counties cover different companies will cover different amounts in different counties. I would talk to the farmers around you and ask them who they have for insurance. A lot of folks around here use State Fund or State Farm, and also there is like a last stop insurance provision option through the state, which I don't have a ton of information about here, but I'll try and pull a link for that questioner later. Not been able to get liability insurance for my farm. I would want premise liability, not product, but I've been turned away from every company I've tried. Okay, same question. Yeah, ask your neighbors who they have for insurance, and then if they don't, ask the small business development centers. Okay, cool. Let's keep going. Let me see a couple of chat questions too. There we go. Okay, so, oh, this is great. There's a lot of active chat here. Can a lawyer help with disputes with insurance companies? Yes, lawyers can help with disputes with insurance companies. I'm going to circle back to that when we're talking about a specific example that I have here. Okay, so like I said, there are types of lawyers for every different type of problem, for every hat you have to wear as a marketer and a business manager and a financial planner and yeah, I mean part-time like realtor to like figure out land stuff. Like there's going to be an equivalent lawyer for each one of those things. So there's there's too much for us to get into everything, so we're gonna pick two for today, and the two that I thought were most kind of germane to this work is employment law issues and liability and injury. So with that, um, we're gonna talk through different types of labor. If I could do another poll, I would, which is who thinks there is such thing as any free legal labor on a farm? Don't answer that. The answer is no. The answer is almost always no. So we'll go through a couple of different types of employment categories and talk through the implications therein. The first being independent contractors. Um, Independent contractors, a lot of people want to hire people and pay them as independent contractors. You can't really do that. If you're, let's say you have a small scale diversified organic farm and you need help harvesting your loose leaf crops, or you need help bunching or something like that, and your normal crew is managing, but you have extra yields and you want to get somebody in. If anybody is coming in to do anything that is standard part of your business that helps you earn a profit or suffer a loss, that is the service that you normally do, that is a task that is on site and that is controlled by the supervisor, being the farmer or maybe a field manager, that is not an independent contractor. So the biggest things for independent contractors is they have their own tools, they have their own schedule, and they're in charge of the project. So in the example that I just provided, anybody that you hired to help with your extra harvest needs would just be labor that you would be paying on a short-term, maybe part-time basis. But if at the same time all that work was happening, you hired somebody who was maybe like a local handyman or um person who was able to like fix a lot of different things, and they came over to fix a part of your variable speed pump on your booster pump coming out of your well, and when he or she are there coming onto the property, they're setting a time with you to work. They're saying, here's when I can come, here's what I'll do. But they're in charge of their own time. That's an independent contractor, and that is not something that would fall under labor, which I think a lot of people think that like that you can just make anybody an independent contractor in a pinch, and that's not the case. So it's important to think through that. The other thing is there's tax implications to all of this. With an independent contractor, you're gonna be doing like a 1099 if you pay them over $600. So that's important to know as well. Okay, and please keep those questions coming. Appreciate it. But and thank you for sharing who you use for insurance. That's super helpful. Whoops, how do we go back? There we go. This feels a little silly to have a whole slide for, but I think it's worth revisiting. When you're employing somebody, you're permitting a person to do work for your for-profit business and you're compensating them with money. And almost everybody that works for you, if you have a for-profit business, is going to fall into the category of employee. Interns, apprentices, what is that? How does that fit into this whole thing? If somebody is involved in a formal education program, or if they receive a significant broadly educational benefit and they're not displacing current employees, then legally speaking, they're an intern. But if one element of this criteria is not met, then they're an employee. And I can give you a really good example of how this looks above board, which is Agroecology Commons, an organization in the East Bay, has an internship program where they pair interested interns with farms. They pay the farm a stipend as part of this educational program. They also pay the intern for working on the farm for their labor. So it's a it's like the farmer's getting paid out and the labor is getting paid out, but not by the farmer. That is all under the purview of an educational program that allows for like a significant educational benefit. And those interns are not just doing like rote farm work. There's a much more kind of like focused, intentional program on learning, and the kind of the why behind the what. For-profit businesses are not eligible to have volunteers. For-profit businesses are not eligible to have volunteers. Whether they're strangers, relatives, or friends, if workers do the work of a for-profit business, they're within the definition of employed that we discussed earlier. There are very few exceptions to this, but again, if your business structure is a for-profit business, technically having, somebody come over for the day to help you out on the farm, if they're harvesting, if they're helping you box anything up or drive anything to wash and pack, all of that technically would count as employed labor. Now, this happens all the time, and that's totally fine. I don't they're it's not legally fine, but it occurs a lot. The trigger for all of these things, which we're about to get into in the next section, is like something going wrong. And most of the time, even if you have family over and they're helping and somebody falls and twists their ankle or something like that, it's not going to become this huge employment legal issue. But if you really want to play it safe, then if you're having friends and relatives over and they want to help, just make sure that whatever they're assisting with doesn't have to do with the kind of for-profit elements of the business, generally speaking. Okay, great. And I have a note about this that I wanted to read. Flying through all my notes here. Okay, right. Interns. Okay. Here's my note about enforcement. So if these are the rules, why are so many businesses not following them? It often comes down to a lack of enforcement. The only way the ball would get rolling is if somebody lost their job and filed for unemployment. And in the claim, the insurance division asks, like, were you employed? Who was your employer? It's one of the common ways for farms to end up in an investigation. The worker themselves may file a complaint with the state agency or the IRS that they were misclassified. This often happens after the worker goes to file their income taxes and discovers that as a 1099 or contract worker, since they didn't withhold any taxes, they're stuck with a bill running to thousands of dollars. The advantage when you're putting people on payroll, you're both equally paying into these things, and when you're an independent contractor, you're not. That just becomes part of your taxable income. So there are multiple reasons why it's safer and better to have people on payroll despite the burden that payroll entails. But the main thing is that it can help insulate you later, from having some pretty big issues come up. Let me pause real quick. Great question. Release of liabilities statements, they help a lot. I should also say I'm not a lawyer. I might be someday. I'm applying to law school. But so I'm not giving you none of this is legal advice. I'm not giving like full legal advice, but in my experience, as I've learned through this educational program, through this fellowship with Farm Commons, in terms of getting people to sign releases of liability, it's very helpful. It is way better to have the kind where people read it and sign it as they come onto the property than the kind where it's just a written statement that's hidden in a bathroom somewhere on the property that says, like, by virtue of being on this property, I waive all my rights to X, Y, and Z. If you want to be diligent about it, have either a physical or a digital document that folks can sign and that you can keep records of, for a couple of years after, especially if you're doing big events. It certainly is helpful. That's a good question. A couple of folks in chat are sharing some insurance opportunities in the Humboldt, Mendo area. And I think that's the chat. Let me check. For some of these extremely specific questions, I probably won't have time to answer them without long, awkward punctuations of silence while I look into them more. So I might not be able to answer all of them, but okay. State Farm no longer offers. Thanks, Yolanda. Okay, cool. Let's keep moving. Oops. Okay, let's take a gander at another arena. This time. Injury liability and insurance basics. So, well, let me go back a little bit here. Now we're probably good on that. Okay. So let's start with a story here. So let's imagine a pasture walk and a farm dinner gone wrong. I'm gonna create a scenario that we'll all talk through here. Farmer May is a local producer. She raises pastured cows, turns milk into farmstead cheese, regularly hosts farm tours, pasture walks, classes for the community. Um, May was approached about hosting an event on her farm. It was going to be a farm tour and a pasture walk, crackers and cheese. Everyone was familiar and friendly with each other, very informal. People brought their kids. At one point, crowd of 20 or so people are touring, and they're right next to cows in the stalls. Some of the kids were jumping on each other, and one of them happened to bump into an elderly man who was pushed into the cow stall, which alarmed the animal, and the cow like stepped on his ankle, broke a bone. So they immediately got Bob to be seen by the doctors. When Bob goes into the doctor asks, "How'd you get hurt?" He says, "Well, I got squished by a cow." Doctor makes a note of this. Bob gets fixed up and he's on his way. Bob's got health insurance. He's got excellent health insurance. He tells the farmer he'll be fine. His out-of-pocket costs are low. He probably doesn't, he's like, "Don't worry about me. Everything's going to be fine." Um, that is an example where you're like, okay, that all sounds great. But let's say 2 weeks later, Bob decides he's like, you know what, actually, I do want to file charges. Um, so the so Bob might be happy to let this go, but it's not always up to him. It's actually up to his insurance company. And I think one thing that's worth understanding here a little bit is that since the insurance company is paying for Bob's treatment, if there's any reasonable way in which they can find somebody else responsible, they'll consider a lawsuit because they want to get paid back for their expenses in addition to premiums that they get paid. That's how the insurance company works. So Bob's health insurance company would actually call him and give interviews about the injury, when, how, where. He tells them everything he knows. Um, part of the health insurance process is us agreeing to communicate about the injuries that we're seeking treatment for. And so Bob tells him some kids were roughhousing during the farm tour, was pushed into the cow's stall, and stepped on. The insurance company takes this information and says, yes, the farm is possibly liable. So they initiate legal action. Farmer May goes to her mailbox and the next day pulls out a letter stating that Bob is suing her. Since the health insurance company doesn't necessarily care that Bob doesn't want to sue Farmer May, the insurance company doesn't care that they're friends, and the insurance company is strictly financial interest at heart here, is why they're doing that. So I think it's worth pausing to emphasize this point that like Bob's a nice guy, means no harm to the farmer. He isn't suing May because he's not a litigious guy. But what it means for perspective as farmers is that working with nice people is not legal protection. And I think that's sad, but it's true from a strictly legal standpoint. Like people with good intentions who say they don't, mean any harm doesn't mean that like these other mechanisms like insurance will kick in. Um, so that's all irrelevant. In terms of like that Bob's really nice. I mean, it's not irrelevant. We're glad Bob's nice. We'd rather Bob is a nice guy than not a nice guy. But okay, so anyways, so May walks down to the counter or to her mailbox the next day, finds a letter saying she's being sued, and is panicking. Is this my responsibility? What does the law have to say about this? Am I even liable? And I'm curious what folks think about whether or not May was liable. The answer is complicated, but the very simplified version is that May is responsible if she was negligent. Negligence, in a legal sense, means acting kind of below the reasonable standard under similar circumstances. So much of um, law revolves around the concept of like a reasonable person standard or an average. How would an average person act in this? Who's a reasonable person? What's the reason? Is it me? Is it you? Is it an aggregated version of the bunch of us? Nobody knows. But that's the kind of legal court standard for, and that would be something where like if it did go to a criminal trial court, then there would be basically the trial would be used to ascertain whether or not negligence was in fact there, whether or not May was in fact negligent by not having maybe like more signs up around the livestock or not giving enough notice about safety on site, um, not telling people ahead of time what the terrain would be like. At a certain point, I'm not saying all of those things would be legally required, but you can only protect people from themselves so much before, like, inevitably, if somebody decides to do something um, self-harming, that's you as a business owner, like, you can't take full responsibility. It's like a weird example, but if somebody's like trying to hurt themselves and they want to break their ankle, like that's not negligence on your end. Uh, but okay, so let's talk about negligence a little bit and the legal definition. But basically, if she was less than reasonable in terms of the preparation and the safety that existed on the farm, then she would be. If she did enough things, then be okay. Um, Let me switch. This is a much better slide that has all that housed in there. Um, okay, let me stop for a second and go through the chat here. Q&A. And thank you for sharing all those legal resources from NCAT and ATRA. Farm Commons, I was gonna save this till the end, but I'll just say it now. The Farm Commons has a ton of great legal resources. I think it's just farmcommons.org, and I believe there's a fee. I think if you reach out to them, they have different ways to cover that. And they have a great resource library. They also have a community, like it's like a mini Facebook message board type situation where you can ask specific legal questions and the lawyers at Farm Commons will troubleshoot answers. They won't provide like detailed follow-up free legal services, but they will help like take a first pass look at what your challenges is. Looks, I think people are sharing only with the host and panelists, not with everyone. That I'm not sure about. I'm seeing things in my Q&A and I'm seeing things in chat. Um, and so I probably get to see the Q&A and you all get to see the chat. So maybe if you're sharing resources or anything, chat would be the way to go. Oh, that's weird. I see both. It's like they're the one thing. Oh, okay, got it. Q&A. Any legalities or issues to look out for if you are wanting to start a community garden? This is a great opportunity to talk through all of the things. The short answer is yes. There are lots of legalities and issues to look out for when wanting to start a community garden. I think if you're starting from scratch, starting with entity structure is going to be the first thing that you're going to want to look at. I can pull up a different slide if we have time, but anybody who just handshake agreement starts doing work, that's a general partnership. If you go into business by yourself and you're doing anything, you're a sole proprietorship. And then we get into different types of entity structures, LLCs, S corps, things like that. And that all gets kind of tricky. But the reason that starting with entity structure is helpful is because that will inform other legal responsibilities and tax implications for lots of other different things. So in general, if I were starting a community garden, there would be securing land through a long-term, mid or long-term lease. You don't want to invest short-term in a land that you won't be able to do a lot with for very long. And urban soils tend to be really poor to work in, so raised beds or heavy compost. Anyway, I'm getting like way aside in the weeds. But there are lots of legal issues when you're starting a community garden. And then, yeah, employees, payroll, all those things. Okay, let's see. Let me keep going. I've not been able to get insurance. Let's see. Oh, okay. And are folks able to see the Q&A in the chat, or at least have access to ask questions in Q&A in chat? It looks like I'm seeing things are getting sorted in there, so I'm gonna keep going here. Okay, so so this gets into what happens next, which is how do we figure this all out? Bob is sitting at home with his ankle resting nicely, feeling sad that he might get Farmer May in trouble. Bob's insurance company, on the other hand, is like, this is clearly a case of negligence and neglect. Like, there wasn't adequate stuff to warn Bob about X, Y, and Z. Uh, there there weren't any, but this is where things get interesting, is like, what is your responsibility as somebody hosting an event to keep people safe from each other? And it's like, to me, it would be unreasonable to have, signs visible from every point of gathering on a farm that say like, no roughhousing, don't let kids play here. That all seems totally unreasonable. You might find that in a place where somebody is like primarily concerned with legal liability, like at a venue where all they do is host, wedding venues and stuff like that. They will probably have more signage in more places because they've had more opportunities to be liable to kind of on-site injuries and things like that, which is not what's going to happen. um, if you're just farming all the time and you occasionally have a farm to table dinner, two times a season or something like that, like you're probably going to be fine with having people sign waivers and doing like a very thorough safety walk through all the walking areas, all the places where you're going to have people from the general public around. You want to be able to walk through those spaces and think through like, what's the worst case scenario of this space? Like, what would it look like if this were going on or that were going on? Or what is the potential for cows to get out? Should we put them somewhere else for this event just so they're further away? It's important. There is a growing trend that is fantastic of more kind of on-farm events, not just farm to table, but kind of like farm days, open farm days, or like farm stand plus tour plus you pick CSA. All of those things are great, but I think just being on top of signage is going to help a lot. So, okay, here we are in our hypothetical, and these sides are arguing with each other. They'll start to kind of figure out what their best arguments are, and the attorney for the insurance company might say something like, sure, farmers do host farm tours all the time. Yes, but most farmers limit the size of the tour group to no more than 7 to 8 people. 20 is way too far large of a group in most farmers' opinions. Most farmers also are aware that young people can get rowdy. In those cases, most farmers require chaperones. Most farmers do not hold tours the way that Farmer May did. That's going to be what the insurance company is going to say broadly. Now, May's going to say something totally different. May will be like, we acted just like every farmer, and therefore there's no negligence all around the country. On every nice summer Saturday, farmers are hosting field events. Thousands of farmers nationwide are helping fellow farmers and community members on to see what's happening. Kids are almost always welcomed, and mixed groups of young and old are touring barns all the time. This is incredibly common, and Farmer May did just what all farmers do all the time. So which side is right? You might have your opinions. I have my opinion. None of those things matter in the event that this would get escalated to like a case to determine liability, in which case it's going to be a judge or a jury that's going to decide, and it's going to be up to them, their judgment of whether or not this was like a standardized practice that's very regular or something that seems far afield. I think this is where like a good faith effort of demonstrating a pattern of caring about safety is going to be really important. Having documentation about safety, having standard operating procedures. So, for example, if May had also, I mean, and we don't know if she did or didn't have this, but let's say May has an integrated pest injury, illness, and prevention plan, and that includes like what happens if guests get injured, and it's just like a flow chart or a checklist of like, okay, if somebody gets harmed, what do we do? Like step one, we assess, or et cetera, et cetera, and it can look different for wherever you are. Having that is a good document to have. It shows that you're making a commitment to on-farm safety. What would be even better would be to have that plus a waiver of liability that people sign when they come on site that day, kept in a log. Maybe there's also like a greeting meeting where you're saying hi to all the participants of your event, and you're also saying, just so you know, this is a working farm. There's sharp things, there are live animals, there's electrified fences. We've tried to label everything, but we really appreciate it if you can all be extra careful and cautious, especially with your kiddos. Like all of that stuff goes a long way. Having that set up ahead of time. A lot of that will help. So, okay. See a new chat question. Mediation first instead of lawsuits. If that is at all possible, I would say yes. At a certain point, insurance companies I mean, that's not going to be in the insurance company's best interest, but at least not in their like financial best interest. But I think if there are any other way to work through conflict resolution that's available to you, I would try to use. Unless you feel really strongly that like that was a situation where you're like fully protected, where you're like, or maybe you have like cameras or something, and your camera happened to catch an incident of somebody doing something that they're claiming you were negligent for when it was clear that they like, yeah, I mean, this is a really weird example, but just to kind of drive the point home, if you had a camera behind your wash and pack and like you were having a farm to table event and somebody was maybe drinking too much, walked back there, picked up a 50-pound case of apples above their head and like dropped it on themselves and, got concussed or something. And you had that all on camera, like there's no way a judge or a jury is going to be like, you're liable for that injury, even if alcohol is being served. Like just by serving alcohol, you're not inherently liable for whatever happens for people when they drink. But again, I'm not a lawyer. You should talk to a lawyer if you want the specific answer to the specific situation in your specific region. Like only lawyers will be able to answer those questions. I really appreciate Anne's comment in there. And everyone should check out Deborah's comment too, if you do. If you do know of good ag lawyers, CPAs, make sure to email them to Deborah. Okay, where were we? Let's see. Okay, insurance. Insurance is complicated and terrible most of the time, in my opinion. But it's great when we need it. But when people think about insurance, we tend to think about like a pile of money that insurance companies give you when you're injured. Here's $200,000 to pay your medical bill. We tend not to think about what happens well before any payouts, which is the insurance company appoints an attorney to defend the farm or a person who tries to make sure the farm isn't found liable in the first place. The monthly or annual bill that you will pay for liability insurance is going to be tough to handle. It can feel like throwing away a lot of money. It may help if you focus on the full value of that policy, though. Premium payments are basically like a retainer for an attorney because you're going to get the attorney from the insurance company. Premium payments also ensure that you have money to compensate the injured person if you do end up being responsible. So insurance, premiums suck, but also it's a lot safer than, needing to pay several $100s an hour for a lawyer, or more. Let me pause there again. Mindy, your question, what is the term for liability for livestock that is housed on another's property? That's a really good question, specifically bees. I don't have a good answer for that off the top of my head. There's like two ways I'm being pulled, so I'll just abstain. Looking at other things in chat and Q&A. Let's see. Great. Okay. These we keep going. Okay. If we were to kind of boil down Farmer May's story, we could probably boil it into something along this statement. Insurance is the single best risk management strategy for injury liability and is necessary even on the safest of farms. Most people think insurance is there to provide money when something goes wrong. That's true, especially with property insurance. There's a fire in the barn, insurance gives you money to rebuild. But when we're talking about liability, the value of insurance comes in before that. The insurance policy is there to get the farmer a capable defense and at no cost to the farmer. Then, if the farmer's attorney loses, the insurance company also pays out on the resulting liability. So insurance is essential, even for the farmer that does everything right, primarily because farmers need to prove that they did everything right. Everyone needs insurance because anybody could be sued when anything goes wrong, because that's how we figure out who is liable. So I want to shift now to talk a little bit about insurance policies addressing liability for what kinds of injuries. Um, but it's, yeah, if for anybody who has gone through this process, I think it's really laborious and time consuming and painful sometimes. I'm gonna share a couple of examples of situations that I'm aware of that kind of highlight this, that are kind of general. But okay, let's see. Pull my notes here. Okay. So we talked about insurance being the single greatest thing on earth ever. It's not. Idiots. Okay. So the hypothetical with May kind of went to a courtroom, but that's really rare. Most of the time, it's not going to go to a trial. It's going to settle out of court, and um, they'll reach a settlement through negotiation. So before even this will happen, like in the interim period between people talking about the insurance company's attorney and whoever's representing the farmer, they're going to be kind of talking back and forth, writing strongly worded letters. But at one point, somebody might make a proposal for like a settlement, and mediated negotiation can also be an option. But anyways, so it doesn't change kind of how negligence is viewed or how it's determined. The settlement basically just focuses in part on how easily liability could be proved in court. So if it would be easy to prove that May is liable, the insurance company has kind of less cards to play. The injured person has more power in those situations. And alternatively, if it was the other way, then it would be reversed. But you can see that there's this connection between safety practices and insurance. Most insurance companies will do a routine inspection of the property they insure. They're looking for things like collapsing barns, unsafe conditions, things they know that will make them harder to defend against in court. So it's kind of like you're almost like a living case. You're almost like a living court case as your operation exists and looks in real time. And when they come to make the assessment, part of their assessment is like how many how many free points would we be giving the other side by ensuring this faulty structure that's half falls down. And um if you have a dilapidated barn that you're still using that isn't cordoned off and has caution tape all around it and giant signs, do not enter, dangerous, condemned, etc., and you have an event right next door with kids and a kid goes in there and something bad happens, like that's going to be a lot easier to show negligence despite your signage just because of the proximity that you put the things in next to each other. So I hope that made sense. If it didn't, please, for any of this, please ask clarifying questions. I feel like I'm trying to get through a lot of really dense, hypothetically new, like conditional things. So I want to make sure people are getting kind of utility out of this presentation. Okay, so we're getting further here. All kinds of different liability insurance, and they're not universal. So basic farm liability insurance is not going to cover everything. It's not going to cover agritourism and value added good production. Like the there is not one master policy that will cover a canned good that you process that made somebody sick and covers somebody tripping and hurting their foot at a farm to table dinner and protect you from like, anything else. So a lot of this is where like talking to an insurance company and asking them to come on to your property or talking through everything that you do as a business will be helpful. It's awkward and it's uncomfortable because it feels like you're like spilling the beans sometimes to these, to insurance agents or to lawyers, but um if you decide to be insured, if you decide to do everything above board with your business, part of that requires just being open and talking to insurance companies, unfortunately. And they don't make it cheap and they don't make it super affordable or easy, but it is really important to have. Okay, let's see. I need to take like a quick water break. Typical farm liability covers, excuse me, typical farm liability policies cover injuries that can happen to farm customers and guests while on farm and that occur in the course of farming, which begs the question, how do we define farming? But basic farm liability insurance will cover injuries to folks who are delivering inputs, purchasing farm products, repairing farm equipment, and the like. Farming is often includes on-premises sales, but often doesn't include sales that happen off the farm, like those that happen at the farmer's market. The insurance company will clarify that farmers market sales are the only exception to the rule that the sale has to happen on the farm, but you have to ask. And food safety is really complicated, and we're going to get into that next after I pause to check the chat. Let's see. Can you read the questions aloud since not everyone is posting questions? Yes, I will do that in the future. I want to circle back to the mediation thing real quick, less in terms of insurance and dealing with liability or things like that. But if you do have if it's truly just something between you as a business and an individual or another business, California Cal Agricultural Mediation Program is a statewide program that offers free mediation for agricultural issues that could revolve around I mean generally the land stuff turns into lawyer type conversations, but it's a really if you are struggling and it's interpersonal or it has to do with relationships or things like that, and it's something where having a third party mediator would be helpful. CalAmp is a really good resource for that. And there's a cool CAF put together a thing called Sketch that will allow me to send all of you both the slides and like any additional notes, and I'll pull from the chat. I'll send everybody, Deborah, your request for a vetted list of lawyers, CPAs, and et cetera. And I'll also put a couple of links to CalAmp. CAF has really good food safety plan resources that can, they're templates ready to go, checklists. This is how you can set up an FSP. And Farm Commons is also another really good, a good place to get resources. I talked about them earlier. Maggie's webinar chat question is that chat or Q&A? I'm going to read it either way. I've purchased 1-day policies for large events in the past, i.e. weddings. They were very reasonable, like $50. Is this a good option for covering on-farm events like dinners that a property or a farm business policy wouldn't cover? Yes. Without knowing, based entirely on the information that's available to me, yes. Extra insurance for one day, big, large events is definitely going to be a good way to go. And it will help. It's the kind of thing where, in some ways, the way to think about it is like, how can you just continually protect yourself from risk? And paying for the highest, most expensive policy is going to be cost prohibitive to your cash flow, and you're probably not going to need to draw on it at any point. So having, like, if you're going to have one-off events and can pay a reasonable amount to get covered, then I think that's a really, really good way to go. So, yeah, I would be supportive of that. And thank you to whoever dropped in the CalAmp link for folks to look at right now. Um, okay. I was also originally hoping to have a farmer sitting next to me to talk about how all of these elements have shaped out on their farm. But it turns out that when there's a big storm coming in 2 days and there's a lot of work to be done, that availabilities change, and it's all good. Uh, okay, let's keep going here. Okay, food safety, super fun. Has anybody please put in the chat if you've had to go through GAP certification for food safety? I'm curious if anybody's had to get GAP certified. Okay, looks like nobody is. Well, congratulations, because it's really not fun. But it's important if you want to access new markets, and that means having the paperwork ready to go. So when we're talking about food safety liability, this is more about it's more complicated, and it's more complicated because there's more people involved, there's more regulation, and there's more basis for liability. There's the processor, the distributor, they're all handled through different liability policies, product liability versus, the other types. And this is where having records and SOPs and safety plans and cleaning logs and all of those things come in handy. So I'm just gonna go back to, like, rainy day in the winter, you have a little bit of downtime, you can't go outside and do anything. Why don't I think through how we want to clean our harvest knives for the whole year, and just write up the policy, print it out, laminate it, put it next to the packing shed so that everybody knows that they get washed at, a certain interval regularly, extracted a log. All of those things come in handy if way down the line somebody gets sick from some lettuce that you harvested in a field. But it's not just, okay, we clean our knives regularly. It's, here's how we clean our wash station. It's how you track your harvest from the field to the box to the end user. That matters differently for different people at different scales. I'll leave it there, but food safety injuries are often addressed through separate policies, product liability policy, but it's good news that we're talking about insurance coverage for all types of injuries. So, okay, let's see. I'm gonna pause on food safety just for a sec in case people have specific questions. I really want to encourage folks to check out CAF's food safety plan resources. Also, believe it's called Carlson Consulting. Kathy Carlson is in the Central Coast area and does a lot of free or subsidized food system plan evaluation and support. And those are really good resources too. This would also include things like having yearly water tests done for potable water, water that's used for wash and pack, things like that. Um, okay. Uh, Basically, when all of this is wrapped up, what you need to do is talk to multiple insurance agents that cover different types of insurance and tell them what you do and ask them if their coverage provides coverage for those actions. And if it's not, go find a new insurance agent or multiple insurance agents. And policies change all the time. Fire insurance is like extremely hard to get almost anywhere in California. The the upside, I guess, from the fire insurance standpoint is that most farmers are the most readily available people to be able to make defensible spaces and, cut fire lines and all that stuff. But yeah, insurance is a beast. Let's see. Okay, before we go to takeaways, because well, let's just go there now. Takeaways from today, think through worst case scenarios for everything. And we didn't even get into like business entity structure. Like, quick aside, you're talking through what kind of entity structure you want. Let's say you land on a general partnership with your partners. For any entity structure, but especially for a general partnership, like you absolutely need to think through what happens. Let's say there's three of us. What happens if one of us dies? What happens if one of us leaves? What happens if one of us decides to take all the money in the bank and fly to Central America and never come back? Um, it's silly and it's like very unlikely to happen, but you want to have them in place because sometimes they do. And it's really hard. Um, let's say you're in a general partnership with somebody, you have a perfect relationship, everything's going good, and then something just changes, and all of a sudden you two can't stand each other. If you don't have written agreements in your partnership agreement about how you want to dissolve that business, like they could theoretically go to court with each other and been like, well, I worked 80% of the time and they only worked 20% of the time. So I want 80% of the money, even if that's not true. Like they could make that claim and would go to court. It would be nasty, litigated, all this stuff, or mediated. In that case, that's something that could be mediated. But if you have the documents, you're just like, this is the contract we signed. This is the legally binding agreement that speaks to what we decided to do when things don't go well. And I just think it's really, really worth having those discussions, even if it's like an activity in jest for fun. Be like, okay, well, what would we do if this happened? Like, think through it, do it, have guiding documents, having standard operating procedures, injury illness prevention plan, food safety plan that's never going to hurt you. Nobody, I mean, I'm sure theoretically it could somehow, but like in general, having more documentation, showing good faith efforts to make your farm safe, free of risk for both you, your employees, and any guests you might have is going to be the best way to kind of bolster your resilience from a legal standpoint. There are really great resources out there if you know where to find them. Thank you to everybody who's been plugging them into the chat. We definitely need what Deborah is working on is like a vetted list of lawyers and CPAs. You can also reach out to KTA, where I work, Kitchen Table Advisors. We've got a list, at least in the kind of broader Bay Area, 16 county plus region. We've got good relationships with a lot of CPAs and a couple of also just people who can help with record keeping. So food for thought. And okay, we got 5 minutes left. So questions, please. It's so strange not to see other faces. I forgot about that from last year. Oops. Let me stop sharing for a second. Go back. Okay. Yeah, that's a good point. That's a really good point, Vince. If you don't use your SOP, don't write it. But but it's better like if you're doing the same thing every time, like you can write what you're doing. You I wouldn't go out of the way to make things unless you feel like there's a reasonable reason why you would need one. Like if you're selling to farmers markets, everything's going good, and you're selling to restaurants and grocery stores, and you don't need any extra permitting, and you don't need any extra GAP certification, and you don't need a super complicated FSP, then you shouldn't make a super complicated FSP. Most of the time, a food safety plan is even something that farmers think about is when a buyer is like, hey, this looks great. I'd love a bunch of boxes of this, send it to me and send me your food safety plan. And then people scramble and are like, oh, okay, I need an FSP. And then you can decide what level of kind of granularity you want to get. And if you want to go for the full suite, the, GAP certification, porta potties a certain distance away, spread out various distances throughout your field so that, workers have an equidistant access to bathrooms, every trash can has a bin on it, there's cleaning logs for everything you can possibly imagine, then you have to do that stuff if you want to sell as a GAP certified vendor. But if you don't, then don't. Because what Vince is talking about in the chat here is what would happen if, like, let's say you got audited and they found an SOP and they found that it hadn't been, the cleaning log hadn't been adjusted, and like nobody had said they cleaned in like a year, or you have this really robust SOP, but you're not doing it, and then they observe that, then that actually would make you liable. That's the other side of this, is like each one of those documents is kind of a commitment. Like the way to think of it is like a commitment. It's a commitment that will protect you down the road if you stay committed. If you don't, then it could harm you. So thanks for bringing that up. It's a really good point. Let me check this other Q&A. For folks with like super specific questions, in the Q&A, Darlene and see the first one about adequately capitalized anonymous attendee LLC. Feel free to send me a email with your question, and I can, when I have more time to ponder it, I can answer. Let me throw my email in the chat. Okay, we only have a minute left. I really appreciate everybody's time and participation, and it would have been great to see y'all. But I see a lot of friends and family, or family, I think maybe for a second family, but a lot of friendly faces in the crowd of attendees. So thanks all for coming. And yeah, I'll follow up on the sketch with everything else. I hope this was useful. Please hit me up for individual questions or anything. And yeah, just like, don't be scared about legal stuff. It's just another thing. It's like soil health or market sales techniques. It's just this other thing that you have to figure out as a farmer. So don't be shy. Just dig in. Last question real quick. When the next fellowship round's open, I'm not sure, but I know they're going to do it again. I was the only one from the West Coast. It was mostly people in the central part of the country, but I think they're trying to get it more. I think Farm Commons is trying to come west. So I'd maybe send them an email to ask. But okay, great. Well, thanks everybody. Enjoy the rest of your day. Enjoy the rest of your conference. Very grateful to CAF for hosting and appreciate all your time.
Thanks so much, James.
Yeah, thank you. Let's see. So I stop sharing. Evan, I got one sketch question.